Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and welcome to the latest edition of Free Thought Hour. Now, I've got some slightly disappointing news for you at the moment because Professor Brian J. Ford, fantastic guy, hasn't turned up. So I've tried poking him, but we only use email to communicate. So I'm not sure whether that's going to be very effective because it's a rather slow and unreliable forms of chatting, isn't it? So in the meantime, welcome, Tercia. How the devil are you, Tercia?
I'm here well, thanks to modern technology, despite load shedding, I am in sort of enlightened. So I'm here I don't know if it's in glory, but I'm here.
Well, it's certainly in the Enlightenment, isn't it?
I would like to think so. Yes, I would definitely like to think that I am sort of enlightened.
Good, good, good. Well, I've been recently inquiring about a solar veranda. Now, you know our house. It's
Yes.
long. It in fact is 14 and a half meters from side to side, not including the extension. And it faces south, almost due south, a bit slightly to the east of south. So it's perfect for capturing solar, making solar electricity. But we can't have panels on the roof because we've got dormer windows. They cast shadow. Solar panels don't like shadow. So we're going to have a solar veranda. How about that?
Well, that would be good. And talk about our guest who might still show up. I do hope that he still makes it.
Yeah, me too.
He is a gentleman of advanced age, and I really do hope that he's well. And I'm sure that there's a legitimate reason why he hasn't made it so far. Let's hope he still turns up. So if he does, just shut me up immediately. But we might put on our schedule, and if there's anybody out there who knows anything about it, I'd like to have a talk about green energy sometime, because in the week my dad played a video clip from so I listened. It was a very interesting clip, and I listened attentively, and it was quite convincing. It was definitely, I could immediately hear that it was anti the green agenda, or the green plan, or what is it called in the States especially. And at the end of the clip, after it was about 7 or 8 minutes long, it said that it was made by Prager University. And the moment I heard that, I just told my dad, I said, this is propaganda. You can't trust the source. So there's two things here.
Which university?
Prager, Dennis
Oh,
Prager,
right.
the news
Yeah.
host. So there's two things that that are important in regards to this whole topic. So the first is green energy, and how exactly does one calculate a carbon footprint, which is really technical. But then the other thing that struck me is the only reason that I immediately knew that this was not a trustworthy source, or at least not an severely biased source, because I mean Prague University is definitely not
Not a
severely
university. It's not a university.
It's not a university.
It's a man with a website who calls
Exactly.
himself the university. Yeah.
Exactly. But I knew that only because I obviously have enough free time and enough of an interest to watch YouTube videos and to know how to. I know enough on how to evaluate sources, and I was thinking, how many people have the interest, firstly, and secondly, the time, if they do have the interest, to get behind these stories. And you hear things on the news, and you see videos, and it sounds very legitimate, and it looks so professionally produced. And one phrase is a dead giveaway to somebody who knows just a little bit, but my dad didn't know it.
Yes.
So there's two issues here. The first is the technical thing of how to calculate a carbon footprint and solar panels, electric vehicles. But secondly, the bigger issue is the great difficulty in this day and age on how to evaluate any source of information on almost any topic. It's not easy.
Well, there you go. This is the trouble, isn't it? Anybody can start anything and call themselves anything. And there's very little way of telling what's real from what's false.
Well, unless one goes into some trouble to find out. And that involves thinking. And most people either don't have the time or the inclination, and many people have neither the time nor the inclination. So even if they do have the time, they don't have the inclination to go through the trouble, because it's not always comfortable to think.
Yeah. Well, I've got a friend who I've known for, I don't know, 30 years, more than 30 years. And he's, as it should happen, he's a religious friend. He belongs to one of the smaller Christian sects. And he's also an anti-environmentalist. He's also anti-climate change. He thinks it's a hoax. And the reason he thinks it's a hoax is because, he says, correctly, there's always been climate changing. And of course, he's right. There's been ice ages, there's been floods, there's been all sorts of very severe changes of climate, which have resulted in massive extinctions of wildlife. But what he hasn't taken into account, and I've tried to explain this to him more than once, is that this time is different. This time it's us. We've dug up all this fossil fuel that's been buried for literally millions of years since the Carboniferous era, and it's thanks to that all being buried that we haven't had very much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The plants fixed the carbon dioxide and liberated oxygen and changed the air. And we are unchanging it. And that's why we should be concerned. But it's very difficult to explain this to people. They don't want to accept it.
Exactly. And it's also, I think the evidence is overwhelming that the climate change we're experiencing now is at a pace that has not been recorded before. And it's, as you say, it's because of what we've been doing in the past 200 years since the start of the Industrial Revolution. It's
the posh word is anthropogenic.
That's right. Anthropogenic. Let me be posh, in view of the upcoming coronation. So no sign of our guest yet, John.
No, I've sent him another email. But, email is not an instant. In fact, do you remember when instant messaging came out? Because originally we only had emails, didn't we, on the internet? And then instant messaging came out, and woohoo! It was like getting your email received and replied to right there and then. That was the novelty.
Well, I still remember a dial-up modem that made that funny noise. And I mean, this was, we got our first dial-up modem in 1999, 2000. Donnie and I. So, things have changed really, really rapidly. But so John, while we either wait or we have to wing it again tonight, like we've done before. There's two things that I can tell you that you might find interesting. So, which would you like first?
Bring us up to date on happenings South Africa wise. Yes, please.
There are always things going on here, but I'll keep politics out of it because that will just be boring. But we had an interesting week from the view of religion, because the church meeting of the Dutch Reformed churches in the Free State had their yearly get-together. And one of the main themes of this get-together was, so just take a deep breath and digest this absolute seriousness of this matter, was to decide whether or not the devil, Satan, is real or not. So ministers and deacons and elders from all over the Free State province traveled, I'm not even sure, I think Bloemfontein, I suppose, traveled hundreds of kilometers and spent a whole week discussing whether or not the devil is real. And so as far as I've been able to establish, the conclusion that they've reached after, and I know how, I don't know if you know how these meetings happen, John. So I grew up in the tradition, so I'm familiar with. Although women are not allowed to attend these meetings,
No.
but I know enough to know that. So they'll definitely open each day with prayer, and before each meeting, they will definitely ask for guidance from the Holy Spirit. So I can just see, I can just imagine these. Serious men, many of them with PhDs or master's degrees, at least 7 years of study in theology behind them, the ministers, that is, opening with prayer and sincerely asking the Holy Spirit to reveal to them at this late stage in humanity's existence whether or not the devil is real. And I regret that there has not been a conclusion to this very serious matter, because the conclusion that the meeting came to was that it's up to each individual member of each congregation whether they want to believe that the devil is real or not. So that's, I don't, don't you think that's funny?
I do, yes, very much. But I've got some good news for you, because I only reported just a few minutes ago in Global Atheist News that the Pope has decided to allow some women, just a small handful of sisters from some Roman Catholic convent, to attend a meeting. What's it called? It's one of the synods, because they've got a selection of synods.
Yes, we've got synods as well. We still call them synods.
Yeah. Yeah, these are advisory bodies which feed into the Pope. And so he's actually giving these women, who've previously only been allowed to attend as observers, a vote. This is historic.
Okay, so roughly that means, okay, so the Catholic Church is about 2,200 odd years old, if one views it in one way. And the Reformed churches are about, what, 500 years old. So we're about 1,500 years behind the Catholic Church. So women in the Reformed churches should get some sort of representative vote in about 500 years, maybe. So that's hope. That's hope, John. Thank you.
That's a bit, yes, that's a bit of, that would be an express decision, I should think. So what amuses me about that story you've just told is that they think they can get the answer to this challenging question about whether the devil is real or not by polling people, by getting their opinions. Is that the way to make those sort of decisions of existence? I mean, I'm a retired science teacher. I'm not going to ask a gaggle of people on the top deck of a bus whether they think that the Loch Ness Monster is real or not. I'm going to go and look. I'm going to get my binoculars out and see if I can find the thing.
Yes, and to make it worse, in this, I'm not sure, make it better, make it worse, it confuses me completely. But the thing is, the conundrum that these believers are in is, firstly, if you have a congregation, you have a group of people who confess that they believe roughly the same thing, but now you're saying, well, you don't have to believe there's a literal devil
Yes.
if you're not. So what else can you sort of just decide what you
Yes.
want to believe on?
Yes. Yes. Exactly.
How
Well.
that sounds to me like a recipe for spreading disunity.
Yes.
Firstly, but more seriously than that, that those people who don't believe in the literal devil, they have another hurdle ahead of them, because in the New Testament, so many Christians say that the New Testament is the new covenant, and they don't disregard the Old Testament, but they tend to say things like, you view the Old Testament through the lens of the
Mm,
New
mm,
Testament. Okay,
mm,
so
mm.
but now in the New Testament, Jesus talks about the devil constantly. In fact,
Mm.
he spent 40 days in the desert
Yes. Yes. He
being
did.
followed by the devil, being
Yes.
uh, uh,
Yes.
taken up the highest mountain, and
Tempted.
being
Tempted.
tempted. That's the word I was looking for.
Mm,
That's being
mm.
tempted by the devil.
Yes.
Jesus speaks about demonic possession.
Yes.
He killed a whole bunch of pigs, sending them into the ocean, driving
Yes.
devils out of people and into the pigs. So,
Mm.
so what? So, if there's no real devil,
What
what
was
was
he doing?
Jesus?
Yes.
Who was tempting him?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So you
It
open up
casts.
this.
Yes. It casts Jesus's words into doubt, doesn't it?
Well,
What
to
was
my
he
mind, it
doing?
does. So maybe,
Has he been
John, maybe we
spinning
can.
yarns?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
I mean, I'm speaking from the view as a former believer. Uh,
Mm,
what is one to do with this? And also, um, the interpretation of most Christians is that it was the devil who tempted Eve in the Garden of
yes.
Eden.
Yeah.
So if there's no real devil,
Mm,
how did that happen? And then, so you see the temptation of Eve and the fall into sin
mm,
of Adam and Eve in the garden. So let's
yeah,
just assume that there was a garden and there was an Adam and Eve,
mm,
um, for the sake of the story. So if that temptation didn't happen, if that fall didn't
yes.
happen,
Yes.
then there's no need for redemption. Then there's
No.
no
Exactly.
need for Jesus.
Mm,
So
yes.
if there was no devil to tempt Eve,
Mm,
who tempted Eve?
yes.
Um,
Oh, it's such a can of worms we're opening here. So,
So maybe, John, maybe we can put this out there and invite some apologist or a pastor, maybe even to clear this up for us, and maybe
mm,
that person can give some insight into the Dutch Reformed
mm, mm,
Synod of the Free State, and
mm,
maybe I'll even send an invite to them and show them this clip, and maybe they can just help and
mm.
and clear it up for us,
Yeah.
because.
We could ask. We could ask. What's his name? That priest and pastor who we had from High Wycombe.
Oh, yes, yes. I see his name in front of me, but it slipped my mind
Oh, I
now.
can't
It'll come
remember.
back to me.
Several months ago now, wasn't it? But we could ask him to clear this up for us, because you're right. First of all, if Jesus was saying, "Get behind me, Satan," was that, what was he talking about? Was that a real entity, or has he been making up stories? Was he having some sort of dream experience? Is it was he medically unfit? Had he been taking drugs? What's going on? And then to
And
talk about to talk about the Satan snake in the Garden of Eden. Well, obviously, if you can decide whether or not there was a Satan, you can decide whether or not there was a snake who was giving bad advice to Eve about eating this fruit. And then you can decide whether or not she ate anything that was evil. And in that case, original sin goes out the window and the need for salvation has vanished. the need for Christianity has gone.
Exactly. And that's why these things have very serious implications. Well, that is, of course, if one takes one's own faith seriously. And that to me is important, because when I was a Christian, I really did take it seriously.
Yeah. Well, you needn't have
Which I
done, you see.
believe.
You could.
Sorry?
You needn't have done, because obviously belief is just a choice, and you can choose it or not. It's like going to the local restaurant and seeing what's on the menu. You know, there's devils on horseback, and there's Satan's cake, and our guest has arrived. So
Fantastic. That is brilliant.
yeah, we'll
That is
carry
good
on this.
news.
Yes, we'll carry on this some other time, I think, and get somebody else involved to sort
I
out this
think we
mystery
need to.
for us.
I think it might be a good conversation.
Yes, indeed. Brian, welcome.
Well, my dear chap,
how the devil are you?
I owe you every apology. I can give you the best of excuses. I forgot.
That's good enough for me.
We had the great grandchildren over with a slight family disaster or two, and I said to Jen, I just got back in and I said, "What were we supposed to be doing tonight?" And then I suddenly thought, and I hope your both of your regular listeners will forgive my directness. I thought, oh, so I immediately dashed in here and switched on the computer. So I would so much like to be able to give you some contorted thing about heavy traffic or something, but we were just confused with the little kiddies. They're so adorable. And when one cuts himself, everything loses any sort of proportion.
Family comes first. That's my motto. But I also have another motto, which is never have children.
Did you never have them?
No, I've got 4. I don't take my own advice. Come on.
I remember we used to have
I want more authoritative advice.
Yep, you used to have a prefect in school who always said, "Ford, you must understand, I'm here to enforce the law, not necessarily to keep it."
Yes.
And and indeed, I think rules are often very much better set by persons who are unable necessarily to follow them. So, my apologies.
Don't worry.
And Mr. P, very nice to see you too.
We're so glad to have you here, because you're such an interesting person. I want you to tell us about your life. How did you get to be Professor Brian J. Ford, freelance scientist? Eh?
Yeah.
I mean, you're
well,
not.
I can tell you that very easily. The first is that before I became a student, I was already a newspaper columnist. I lived in Cardiff in South Wales and was opposed to going to university. I thought university was not a good idea. And in the end, I decided about a week before they opened that I would go. But I was by this time already a newspaper columnist. I'd been to see the editor of the South Wales Echo, which at the time had a readership of about 750,000 people.
Yeah.
And I wrote him and I said, this was in September 1959. And I said, you're going to have science as the big issue of the next few decades. And there aren't any articles in newspapers on science, and I'd like to write one.
Right.
So he invited me in, and he said to me, you can have a 200-word article every Friday called Science and You.
Great.
And I want you to write the first 5. I'll pay you £1 each, would be now about 50 quid. And if they're any good, we'll publish them. If not, we'll bin them, but I'll pay you anyway.
Wow.
Which I thought was a pretty good deal. So I wrote the articles and I sent them in and I heard nothing. And I thought, oh, well, obviously that was no good. And I used to go to the reference library to see the evening newspaper. I couldn't buy one. I was a student. So I went to the evening newspaper in the library and I turned the pages, starting at the back as one does. And I turned through the paper and quite suddenly there was an article. The first in a new series, specially written for the Echo by me. And I banged the newspaper shut with embarrassment. And everything on the front, starting today, our new science column.
Ooh.
And the reason it became Brian J. Ford is this. Jack had rung me up when I sent the articles in, and he said, I see you signed your articles B.J. Ford. And I said, yes, I always do sign everything B.J. Ford. He said, what's your first name, lad? And I said, Brian. And he said, oh, right. Okay, with an I? I said, yes. He said, okay, lad. And he rang off. So that's why I became Brian J. Ford, because once you were in Printers Out, you couldn't really change it.
Yes,
anyway,
yes.
Before the university term started, I went to see the head of biology, and I said, I think I'll come as a student. And he said, no, you apply a year ahead. And I said, yes, but one could apply now, couldn't one? And he said, well, all the places are full. I said, oh, come on, they're big lecture theatres. Not every seat is full. And he said, well, you haven't got a grant. So I then went down to the education office and said, could I go and see the director of education? And they ushered me in because they thought I was going to write an article about him. And I said, I want a university grant. And he said, will you apply a year ahead? And I said the same thing to him. Result was they coughed up the grant. They coughed up the place. And I started. But in my second year, I went to see my head of department. And I said, I don't get this academic stuff. I said, you've been making me learn things for the last year that I've known for years and years. I've been studying all my teenage. And it seems to me that you study a certain thing, you get a PhD, and then when you're 90 years old, you're the world's greatest ever certain thingologist. And he said, yes, that's how the system works. I said, well, I don't want to do that. I might want to work on a subject for a week, or possibly work on a subject for 2 years with 3 other subjects. He said, no, you can't do it. I said, I might want to work in biology or astronomy or physics. What if I get an idea in some other discipline?
Yes.
And he said, you cannot work between disciplines. In science, you choose your discipline and you stick with that. So I said, tell that to euglena, an organism which is considered both a plant
yes, and an animal. Half and half.
And so I said, I'm not going to. And so with all the arrogance of youth, I stormed out, rented a little building in Penarth along the coast, and set up my own lab. And my last formal academic qualification would be A-level biology. I didn't complete my degree, and all of my associations since have been purely on the basis of my published work. So there you are, in a nutshell, the life of Brian up to the age of 20.
Wow.
Brian, can I this is so interesting. So we haven't met. Do I call you Brian or Dr. Ford or Professor Ford?
Brian would be absolutely adequate.
Well, we haven't met. I'm the co-host, and I'm in South Africa in the Western Cape, and I'm Tarsha du Plessis. I'm a couple years the junior of you and John. So and I find your story absolutely fascinating. So I have a question and a comment. Firstly, if you were unfortunate enough to have been a school child today, you would have probably been diagnosed with ADHD, hyperactivity, attention deficit disorder, and you would have probably been prescribed some sort of Ritalin or some drug like that. So I'm very grateful that you did go to school when you went to school, because that's the first thing. And then, you know, as a relative youngster myself, so you say that you started a newspaper column before you began your studies. So I went to school in the 80s, in the late 1980s. There was my high school education, and we used encyclopedias for research. And if when I came to university in 1991, we had microfiche. So how did you do research on all these topics?
Microfiche, my God, that really dates us both, doesn't it?
Yes.
By the way, let me send my best wishes to South Africa. I have visited South Africa only once, but greatly enjoyed it. What I liked most about South Africa was the lift going up Table Mountain.
Yes.
It's a cylindrical lift, and it rotates as it goes up, so that everybody gets a chance of the view. That must be unique in the world. I thought that was wonderful.
When was this? Sorry, I need to know how long ago, because they have a brand new one now.
It would be about 8 or 10 years ago.
Okay, I think the newer, because the one the last time I went up there, they had one that the floor is also transparent. So
no, that wasn't. My goodness, that would cut down the number of people willing to go in it.
It's yeah. We actually hiked up there. It's a beautiful. We hiked up.
World, isn't it? The botany up there is unique. Nothing like what it's like at the bottom of the mountain. It's quite an extraordinary place.
Yes, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think there's something like 200 plant species that only grow on top of Table Mountain. It's more
an amazing place.
Yes,
I mean, you just stand there in this mist of the clouds. It's actually cleared while I was there, which was rather nice. But to stand there in the mist and to see all of these incredible plants, lots of them before Viaceae, I seem to recall, and it was just an amazing environment. I couldn't believe it.
Yes,
later
and we.
I later went around one of the townships and sat in conditions of utter squalor with 20 or so of the township elders talking about politics and about race and about education and the future of the world. And I thought, any of these guys would be a perfect fit at high table at a university in England. They had such depth of wisdom, such incredibly mellifluous and literary English, and yet they were people who possessed nothing and were living in conditions of utter muddy, smelly squalor. It's quite extraordinary how you will find great brains in places where you least expect to find them.
Was this in Cape Town, and was it in Khayelitsha?
Yes,
do you remember?
I can't recall where it was, but it was from Cape Town.
It would probably be in Khayelitsha. That's the biggest township in it's close to the airport. It's in fact on the drive to the airport. It's right next to the road. So,
but yes. I've also been into when I stayed in Mumbai. I always go and walk around the slums, and there you see these incredibly deprived and depressing environments.
Yes.
But the kiddies are all immaculately clean. Their clothes are all sparkling white. Most of them speak English. Those that do speak better English than you hear in England. And they're all dazzling little bright brains. It's an extraordinary world we live in.
Yes. Well, I want to talk to you.
Sorry, John, go ahead.
Thank you. I want to talk to you a bit about education, because what you did back then in 1950, whenever, couldn't be done today. You couldn't march up to a new university and say, I'm going to join you, whether you filled your places or not, and you wouldn't be able to get a grant either. That's all gone. It's borrowing money now or working your way through college. So the world has changed, and not necessarily for the better, but also the route you painted of how an academic is expected to progress from, what they call undergraduate degrees now. I think that's a contradiction in terms, because you graduate, so you can't have an undergraduate degree, and then into higher degrees and eventually PhDs, and become increasingly narrowly specialized. So you end up being the world's expert in limnology or something, and that is so stifling.
Believe me, you talk to somebody about limnology and they're going to tell you of the specific aspects of the specific organs of the specific species which they study.
Yes. A friend of mine studied Sapia nemoralis.
Yes, snail.
Yeah, one particularly strong.
Help me! I'm illiterate. I'm just a literature graduate. So what is that? Is it?
Sapia nemoralis is a small snail, shell about that much in diameter, with dark spirals running around it. Very attractive organism.
It's found on the chalk downlands here in southern England. But what I wanted to talk to you about is, what can we do about this? Because there's so much going on that's going to upset traditional education. It started way back with the Open University, when that was sort of the instigation of studying from home. But now, thanks to technology, everybody has access to pretty much all the wisdom in the world. And they don't need to attend a school or go into a class of similarly aged and abilitied pupils. And so what are we doing? What are these buildings that we call schools? What are these curriculums that require people to be in a group? What is it all about anymore?
I can tell you exactly what it is. Schools have become a nationalized babysitting service for working parents.
Mm-hmm.
That's all they are. We don't teach children anything important in school. We teach them things about which they need to know a bit, like Shakespeare and algebra, but we never teach kids what they need to know. We never teach kids how to wire a plug, how to mow a lawn, how to run a flat, how to iron a blouse, how to mend a sewing machine, how to service your tumble dryer. We don't teach them how to drive a car, how to maintain a bike, how to mend a puncture. How we don't teach them, apart from anything else, how to be people. Currently, because of all the minority sexuality that is suddenly rearing its head, they're now teaching kids in school things like drag art and transsexuality, and the fact that there may be 40 sexes. I never heard any such poppycock in all of my life. What is curious, though, is that although we're now teaching all of these minority, current, fashionable preoccupations, nobody ever thought to teach children how to be nice boys and girls. They were never taught how to be friendly, how to be honest. No young girl has ever been taught how to be a creative, caring, consummately clever professional woman. No young man has ever been taught how to be a thoughtful, dignified, constructive member of society. You see signs in shops now saying, please don't abuse our staff.
Yes.
You see kids now on social media, particularly on TikTok, actually filming beating each other up in order to try and gain following.
Yes.
Whoever told them that beating each other up was bad? Kids are never taught the things they need to know in school. They're never taught how to live life as an adult. All they're taught is the traditional crap that people get taught all the time. And now, of course, we have a system where they're being encouraged to study in England, and particularly to study maths till they're 18. No. You need to know arithmetic. Geometry would be helpful. Algebra is totally pointless. And they don't even get taught Euclidean geometry anymore, which is full of clever puzzles that kids would simply love to understand. No, we should teach kids about Shakespeare. But what about teaching about Dylan Thomas? They rarely come across him. Wonderful writer. Shakespeare was writing scripts for EastEnders.
Yes.
Shakespeare, and so was Charles Dickens. They were the popular script writers of their time.
Yes, they were.
In 200 years' time, somebody said they're going to devote in school months and months and months to teaching all about EastEnders scripts. You think, well, why on earth are we doing this? It's not part of our life.
Yes.
Teach kids what they need to know. Instead of teachers saying, turn off all your phones, say, make sure your phones are fully charged because you're going to need them in the session.
Yes.
Oh, Brian, you know what? I actually started in COVID. I started to homeschool my youngest son, who's 16 now. And by the way, he's doing the Cambridge curriculum. And I took him out of school. Well, it was COVID, so that he was at home. And then when the school sort of reopened on an ad hoc basis, I just said, I'm not sending him back. And I started to teach him at home. And before I knew it, I had about 9 kids that I taught at home. And what you say now is something that I've known. I'm a qualified educator as well. And you know what I taught them? I taught them things like how to change the wheel on a car. I taught them all. I taught all the boys and the girls how to read a recipe, how to cook certain meals, how to sew on a button. I made them sew face masks, boys, girls, everybody. And it was so interesting to me to see that if you expose kids to learning these things that they see in their world, those who have a natural propensity for example, mechanics, some of the boys, not all of the boys, some of the boys, when I taught them how to sew with a sewing machine, they asked me, can we open it up and see how it works? And I said, yes, of course. Look at it. Open it up. You can't don't break it. And it's so interesting that the one thing that language teachers I've never come across in either Afrikaans or English, which are the main languages taught in South African schools, that they teach kids how to use Google. They don't teach them how to formulate a proper search phrase. So what's the use of knowing about Shakespeare, but you don't know how to formulate a search phrase that will lead you in the right direction when you want information about X, Y, or Z?
You know what the youngsters are always asking me? They'll say, "Hey, Pops, I can't find out about such and such. Did so-and-so ever actually do whatever it was?" And I'll do the search and find it straight away. Because,
exactly,
as you rightly say, they know keyword training from school. So school is just a babysitting service. And all they have to do is to memorize all this stuff and then regurgitate it. They're never taught, for example, how to think. They're only made to obey. But the thing about going on to university, John, is, and this is very important that everybody understands it, the point of it is to get children accustomed to being deeply in debt. The reason they go to university, and I said this at a dinner at Cambridge to the students not long ago, and they gave me a standing ovation, bless their little heart. I said, the reason kids go to university is firstly to postpone the evil day when you have to get a job. Secondly, get away from home so that you can get laid and high and play loud music as much as you want without your parents interfering. And thirdly, because of the fact that it gives you the chance to have subsidized bars and subsidized entertainments and meet lots of people who might help you to get laid. That's the reason they go. They then end up with £50,000 of debt.
Yes.
And meanwhile, anybody who didn't go to university, like me, I mean, by the time my friends were graduating, I'd been on BBC television. I was writing a regular column. I was making decent. I had a reputation, status, and an income, whilst they were still in university learning all this stuff.
Yes. Well, I want to ask your opinion about the way things are going, because the modern world, whereas education started way back in the Victorian era as a way of getting workers good enough to be employable in industrial factories, it's moved on, and the latest developments with AI means that everybody can study at the speed they want, into the areas they want. And I'd like to get your opinion about that. Where are we going with that development?
Well, it's not, of course, true to say that education started in the Victorian era. It started a lot longer than that. I mean, in fact, the reason that we have the long summer holidays tradition, it goes right back to the 14th and 15th century, when the kids had to be around to take part in the harvest. That's the reason for it.
It became ubiquitous in Victorian.
What we've now got is 21st century kids being taught by 20th century teachers based on a 19th century curriculum, based to 18th century ideas of schooling, which were rooted in 17th century and earlier social patterns of behavior. It's totally irrelevant. There is no point whatever, apart from being babysat. There is no point whatever in kids going to school. And the fact that you trained your kids at home, you actually did homeschooling, brilliant idea. Our children, well, let me not boast about my children, but let me just say that from my point of view, I learned far more out of school than I ever did in it. We would always take the kids away for a week around the Med or to North Africa or something during term time, because there was an Education Act which was replaced a few years ago, which allowed parents to take their kids out for a pre-arranged annual holiday from term. And when we were there, they would go on the local transport, they would learn some of the language, they would eat the local food, they would learn more in a week in Morocco than they would ever have learned if they'd spent that week in school.
Yeah, nowadays you'd get prosecuted for that, for keeping them away from school. Yes.
Well worth the fine.
Well, Brian, I've had this thing about how one learns and when anybody, not only children, actually learns, and it's when you're doing things. So nobody learns anything when you're sitting on your butt listening to something that you know you're going to have to be tested on so that you can get a mark. That's not how anybody learns. You might retain some of the memory long enough to get even 100% for the test, but what have you really learned? Everything that I've learned in my life was through experience. And with experience,
Always.
I include reading a book because when the kids, so I now have a homeschool tutor center, and the first thing that kids are amazed at when they begin learning with us is that they sort of have their phones surreptitiously hidden behind the desk. I'm like, where's your phone? Where's your tab? Put it out there. You have to read. You have to look things up. You have to. I'm constantly telling them, Google this, Google that, look this up, look that up. And I'm constantly telling them to watch this YouTube video and that YouTube video. And, we have to rethink the way we educate our children for the modern era, because it's just...
Well, now, two things here. First thing I'd mention is that 4-year-old Alfie was over here today. And where was Alfie? He was up a 15-foot ladder, a 5-meter ladder, up on the roof of our barn, clipping off ivy. And he was up there. Every time he moved, he made sure that the secateurs were shut and locked. He had his gardening gloves on. He worked away for the best part of an hour. Not just snick, oh, can we have a chocolate bar? He understands exactly what work was. And when he finished, he came down and put all his things neatly away.
But when artificial intelligence really gets going, though, we won't need workers, will we?
Wrong term. It's not artificial intelligence. There's no such thing. It's digital automation. That's all it is. They've had articles saying, isn't it wonderful that Chat GPT can actually sit an exam and pass it? Wow, that shows that artificial intelligence is as good as a person. No, it doesn't. When a person sits an exam, they sit there in this stultifying atmosphere, terrified that they're going to fail, and they have to recall everything out of their brains. Chat GPT has no brain. It simply has access to all the digital information anywhere in the world. So, of course, it can pass the bloody exam, because in a nanosecond, it can look up the answers to anything. But it is digital automation. When the Lumiere brothers in 1897 showed their film of the train arriving at La Ciotat, the station in France, members of the audience got up and ran out to 5 minutes film. Because they couldn't believe there was a train coming up. We're the same now with AI. We're saying, oh gosh, the train is like, no, it's digital automation. Hardly anything that happens in the world has ever been digitized. All the textbooks may have been, or a lot of them have been. But the things that happen, why you fall in love, why you get hiccups, why you yawn, all the things that go on within self, none of that is amenable to digitization. The digital environment that AI has access to is a gazillion part of what happens in the world. It's an irrelevance, and that's nothing to do with intelligence. It is digital automation, and it's
Brian, John, I know, John, I have to ask Brian this, because the thing about learning, to me, true learning involves the ability to be creative. What do you say about that? I want to use the analogy. So I'm a keen crocheter, and I will. So when I see a pattern that I like, or a new stitch, I will look at a YouTube video, and I will learn how to make that stitch. But then the true learning and application to me happens when I adapt that stitch and all the other stitches that I know and all the ideas that are in my head, and I make something that has never been made before. To me, I don't see artificial intelligence being able to do that. Not in the way that there's a creativity element. Do you think AI will ever get to that point where it can actually be creative in that way?
Well, in the sense that crochet is a repeatable and digitizable process, yes, I'm sure it will. I've never done crochet. It's very difficult, though. I was taught embroidery, and I was taught embroidery at school when I was 8, and I became quite good at embroidery. We were also taught how to cook. The newspapers are full of articles saying how kids are not properly educated and people don't know how to cook meals. And I think, when were they ever taught it in school? When I was in school, I was taught in Ladbroke School in Potters Bar, north of London. When I was about 9 years old, I was taught how you make pastry and pasta. We made our own spaghetti. And to this day, I'll go and make short crust and flaky and millefeuille. I can do all the pastries to this day because I was taught when I was 9. Nobody is taught that anymore these days. I mean, it is utterly bizarre. And you mentioned crochet. People would say, think of Nigel. He's upstairs, he's writing computer code. Oh, he's so gifted. And there's Granny in the corner sitting, knitting a cable knit sweater, and it all comes out. And I would say, yes, but wait a moment. Just look at Granny's knitting pattern. And what is it? It's code. The fact that it's written as a knitting pattern, the way it has subroutines and layers and a whole matrix of arguments, essentially it's the same as writing computer code.
Yes, well, the first
what grandma's got in her head is an algorithm.
Yes. The first computers copied what had previously been used for manufacturing carpets. What was that called? It's a French name.
Jacquard loom. Jacquard in the early 1800s.
The Jacquard loom, that's right.
The Jacquard loom, yeah. That's right.
Yep.
So what we've got now, I've heard ChatGPT described as a stochastic parrot because all it's doing.
No, it's not. That's wrong. A parrot repeats what you tell it. ChatGPT invents stuff. About a month ago, I was asked, somebody said, we need an up-to-date CV. So I thought, oh, shit. So I opened ChatGPT and I said, write a brief CV of Brian J. Ford. And it went, Brian J. Ford is a blah, 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 blah. I've written, and then it said, he has won several awards. I don't think these awards even exist. He had written several, but the titles of the books I'd written. Not only have I not written them, but books with that title don't exist. So I had a PhD from London University. Now the point is, some other co is going to look me up by using this digital system, and they're going to be told that, and they're going to start saying, "Oh, he's got a PhD from London University," and someone's going to say, "Where you get that from? It's online." No, it isn't online. It's nowhere online. It's invented by ChatGPT, which intelligently thought that might be right. But no, it was wrong. It's a complete lie. Now, parrots don't lie. Parrots repeat. That's the difference.
Yes, they don't knowingly lie. If they've been taught to say a lie, they'll repeat it.
But that means
ChatGPT they won't just invent something they've never heard.
No.
That means ChatGPT is human because it can lie.
No, it doesn't. It has been taught to lie by the humans who set it up to lie. That's the point.
Yeah. No, what ChatGPT does is looks at a word and says, what's the next word? Oh, here's a likely next word. And after that, it goes, here's another likely next word. It's predicting the next word. That's
I'm not going to decry the splendid complexity of the algorithms they wrote for ChatGPT. I mean, if you ask it something like, I don't know, the history of crochet or something, and it has been so wonderfully programmed, so ingeniously programmed, that it masters vernacular English and will chat to you, and you really get caught up with the fact, because whoever wrote the code managed to give it the ability to go to a text and analyze it and to extract from it the sense of syntax, so it can write like Shakespeare or possibly even like Dylan Thomas. By the way, you may not know this, but there is software called Zero GPT, and if you put text into it, it will tell you whether it's likely written by a human or by artificial intelligence.
Okay.
The only problem with that is, I once asked it to write for an article. I wondered whether it could write a limerick about microscopes, and it wrote an appalling limerick. It didn't even scan. It had a certain assonance, but it didn't actually rhyme. And I dropped that into Zero GPT, and it said, "This was written by a person, not by artificial intelligence." So even when it comes to diagnostic software, you can't necessarily rely on it.
No.
Well,
no.
I can say that I use ChatGPT quite regularly because I teach in Afrikaans mostly because most of my learners are Afrikaans speaking, and I find that they sometimes struggle with more advanced YouTube videos. So what I do, I use ChatGPT to translate the transcription of a YouTube video about whatever scientific or historic subject it might be, and then it saves me a lot of time. I do have to do some Afrikaans language. I have to fix up the language. It's not perfect, but it saves me maybe half an hour to just ask ChatGPT to translate the text, and then I just have to do some linguistic tidying up. So
am I right in thinking that Afrikaans is Old Dutch?
Afrikaans is now, it's derived from Dutch, but it's not seen as Old Dutch. It's now seen as a totally different dialect of Dutch. But yes, you're right. It's basically
the reason I say that is this: you can hear them speak Norman French in Guadeloupe, in the Caribbean.
Because it didn't change.
And I have always had a fantasy that somebody who was versed in Afrikaans could read the letters of Antonie van Leeuwenhoek, the microscope pioneer.
Yeah.
Because of the fact that he was writing in the 17th century. And it's from 17th century Dutch that Afrikaans originally.
Well, we probably
would. A fanciful idea on my part.
We probably would be able to. I think the biggest struggle would be to understand the script, because to me that's always the most difficult. But we probably would be, because but Afrikaans has changed a lot as well. So for example, I can't read Dutch. So I can recognize some of the words, but I can read it and I understand the gist of things, but it's the two languages have really grown diverged quite considerably. Yes. But
we can't rely on other derivatives from a parent language being sort of fossilized in that old age version of the parent language, as they will be changing in their own volition as well. For example, American English uses the word gotten, which was something that the Pilgrim Fathers would have used, but we've long since dropped it. Meanwhile, of course, American English has introduced a lot of other new words that we've had to cotton on to here. So they're all changing in their own, both forwards and backwards.
I remember in the 70s being at a meeting in Brussels, and the chap who I was with had spent his student years in Sweden. There was a delegate there from Uppsala, so I introduced them, and he chatted to her for a while. And afterwards I said, "How is his Swedish?" And she said, "It was very good." She said, "But it's such old-fashioned Swedish."
Yes.
And I thought, I can't quite understand that now. I mean, I'm 84 now, and now when I hear broadcasts from the 1950s, it sounds, and now I know what that girl meant. It sounds like such an incredibly antiquated tongue. In fact, the earliest recording of me doing radio and television back in the 60s, I would hardly recognize them as being my own accent, because the language has evolved and changed so much. Yes, it has.
Yes, that's right.
But Brian, in Afrikaans, what's interesting, so if I read books that I remember devouring as a youngster when I was 15, 16, and I actually came across one of my favorite books the other day at a secondhand bargain bookshop or something, and I bought it for R5, and I was so excited, and I opened it up, and it was like a foreign language to me. It was, and that's the written language. It was, it's uncanny how very rapidly of the written Afrikaans, not to mention the spoken Afrikaans. I mean, the tone and the register changes because we're less formal, but I do not find the same with English. I mean, you can read English from the 1980s and English today. It's basically this. Written English is to a great extent the same, but Afrikaans has changed so much. It's almost a different language.
Well, Swedish has changed a lot, you see, in that couple of decades. Some languages do. Now, my favorite book when I was little was a book that you can't published now called Little Black Sambo.
Yes.
It was all about a black
I know
family.
that book.
And
I know that book.
adored the family. I mean, the father was so hardworking. The mother always had a clean house and meals on time. And Little Black Sambo lived the most idyllic life. And I thought, how I wished I could have lived a life like that little black boy. How much I loved the idea. Now, of course, people turn around and say, oh, you couldn't possibly say that. That's discriminatory and racist. No, it's history. That's what it is.
Yes.
Well, I remember that book.
Well, guys, I'm going to have to draw this to a close because traditionally, in whatever language we are using, Free Thought Hour is an hour, and we've just completed it. So I'd like to announce that next week we're going to take time off. This is because there's a thing going on here in the UK called a coronation, and it ends with a concert outside Buckingham Palace featuring stars from around the world. And I don't think we can compete with our little show. So come back and watch us next week, the week after. That will be May the 13th, when we have another fabulous guest. Who is it? Let me have a look. See in my diary. Who is it on the May the 13th? It is Tim Bollins, who is back. He visited us a couple of weeks ago and talked about his theory of consciousness, which goes right back to the beginning. He thinks molecules have consciousness. Wow.
So I must tell you something. You mentioned the coronation.
Yeah.
They have removed the Koh-i-Noor diamond from the crown in case it offends the Indians from which it was obtained.
Oh, that's
today, apparently, the descendants of the people who presented the diamond to Queen Victoria as a token of respect are deeply offended that it's not going to be in the crown because they're so proud of the fact that they gave it to an English monarch and they wanted to see it on display at the coronation. But because some idiots thought in the woke era, thought we'd better not offend anyone, they removed it. In fact, the exact opposite is the truth.
Yes, you've offended them because he removed it. I think it's going to be in the Queen's crown, isn't it?
I really wouldn't know.
Yeah.
John, before we say goodbye, it was also Tim Bollins who introduced us to Professor Brian J. Ford. And can I ask here in public that that Professor Brian owes us another 30 minutes, that we could perhaps make it up sometime, because I am extremely curious to find out about those microscopes in the background, because my
trusty friend,
I would love to know about your work. And you said that you had a lab, you opened a lab, and I'd like to know what you did research on. And I mean, I don't know many people who have, 5 that I can see, 5 microscopes just there sort of on your countertop. So I'm very curious about that. So would you arrange with John to give us another half an hour of your life, maybe some other time?
Please come back.
Yeah, okay, I shall.
Thank you. That's your punishment for forgetting about us tonight.
I know. Well, I'd love to give you a fancy excuse, but there we are. Very nice to meet you both, and good night.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. And thank you,
Brian.
for watching. Thank you. Say bye-bye.
Bye.